the dark secret behind why a narcissist stops being intimate with their partner. There is a kind of silence that hurts more than words ever could, the silence that creeps into the space where intimacy once lived. You lie awake, wondering what changed. Was it something I did? Am I no longer attractive? Not enough. The rejection burns in ways that cut deeper than mere distance. According to trauma psychologists, this moment, when a narcissist begins withholding affection, marks the beginning of a powerful psychological manipulation. Sex and intimacy are no longer acts of connection, but tools of punishment, control, and emotional domination. The illusion of intimacy, when desire becomes a mirror. In the early stages, the narcissist's affection feels transcendent, a tidal wave of attention, compliments, and passion that feels almost otherworldly. Psychologists call this love bombing, a deliberate and intoxicating display meant to create rapid emotional dependency. Dr. Ramani Durvasula describes it as manufactured intimacy, an illusion of deep connection engineered to make the victim believe they've finally found a soulmate. But here's the psychological trap. What you think is chemistry is actually mirroring. The narcissist studies your desires, your fantasies, your emotional language, and reflects it all back to you like a perfect echo. You think you've been seen. In reality, you've been scanned. Every smile, every sigh, every emotional response becomes data they will later use to control you. This stage creates a neural and emotional imprint, what psychologists call a schema attachment. Your brain associates the narcissist with validation, pleasure, and belonging. That's why when the affection suddenly disappears, the loss feels catastrophic. You're not just missing a person, you're going through psychological withdrawal from the drug of attention. The withholding, turning affection into punishment. Once the narcissist feels they've secured your emotional loyalty, the temperature shifts. Suddenly, affection turns cold. Touch becomes rare. The same person who once couldn't keep their hands off you now recoils at your presence. Psychologists identify this as intermittent reinforcement, the strategic alternation between reward and rejection to keep you hooked. This withholding isn't random. It's intentional. Narcissists experience emotional intimacy as threatening. True closeness would expose their fragile, false self, the mask they wear to conceal deep shame and emptiness. So they weaponize intimacy. By deciding when and how you can connect, they maintain the upper hand. Dr. Craig Malkin, author of Rethinking Narcissism, explains that narcissists often avoid real vulnerability because it triggers narcissistic injury, a psychological collapse caused by feeling small, inadequate, or exposed. For you, this withdrawal feels like emotional exile. You start to question your worth, replaying every interaction, trying to decode what went wrong. You crave their touch not merely for physical closeness, but for emotional survival. And that's exactly where they want you. Seeking approval, desperate for reconciliation, and willing to bend yourself in half for just a glimpse of the warmth they once offered freely. The cycle of control, pleasure, withdrawal, and power. When the narcissist begins to control intimacy, they begin to control you. Psychologists often describe this dynamic through the lens of behavioral conditioning. Every small act of affection becomes a reward you unconsciously strive to earn back. Each rejection becomes punishment for invisible crimes you'll never understand. The unpredictability keeps your nervous system on high alert, a constant cycle of hope and fear. This psychological conditioning is the foundation of what trauma experts call the trauma bond. Your mind learns to equate pain with love, chaos with passion, and reconciliation with relief. Each time they return to affection, your brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, reinforcing attachment even in the presence of harm. This is why leaving feels impossible, even when you intellectually know you should. According to psychologist Dr. Patrick Carnes, the trauma bond functions much like addiction. You are chasing the high of early connection while denying the pain of current reality. The narcissist becomes both the poison and the cure, the only person who can relieve the very pain they create. The psychological fallout, when desire becomes dependence. Over time, the effects of this emotional manipulation seep deep into your sense of self. You begin to shrink, questioning your desirability, your value, your reality. Many survivors describe feeling frozen, stuck in a loop of self-blame and longing. This isn't weakness. It's a trauma response. Psychologists explain that narcissistic abuse destabilizes the victim's internal compass. Because the narcissist dictates when affection is given or withdrawn, your sense of worth becomes externally dependent. You begin to live for their approval, and in doing so, lose connection with your own emotional needs. The narcissist's coldness is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It's a reflection of their fear of vulnerability. They avoid intimacy not because you are unworthy, but because they are terrified of being seen as ordinary, needy, or emotionally human. Reclaiming power, healing after narcissistic intimacy abuse. Healing begins the moment you understand that their withdrawal was never about you, it was about control. Psychologists emphasize the importance of reframing the narrative. You were not rejected. You were manipulated. Recognizing this helps detach shame and redirect focus toward rebuilding autonomy. Dr. Judith Herman, pioneer in trauma recovery, outlines 3 stages of healing: safety, remembrance, and reconnection. Safety comes first, learning to regulate your emotions, creating physical and emotional boundaries, and limiting contact with the abuser. Remembrance allows you to tell your story, to name what happened without minimizing it. And finally, reconnection, rediscovering who you are beyond the trauma bond. Reclaiming power also means reclaiming your body. Survivors often carry deep somatic wounds, feeling disconnected from pleasure, distrustful of touch. Therapists specializing in trauma-informed care often recommend grounding practices, mindfulness, and body-oriented therapy, like somatic experiencing, to help reestablish a safe relationship with one's body. Because true intimacy, the kind the narcissist could never give, begins with safety, self-acceptance, and choice. And once you reclaim that, no one can take it from you again. Psychologists often say that every abusive dynamic, whether in politics or relationships, operates like a dictatorship, not through overt violence alone, but through the delicate balance of giving and taking away. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a leading expert on narcissism, explains that narcissists understand one universal truth about human psychology: consistency breeds safety, inconsistency breeds dependency. They give you exactly what you crave: affection, attention, sexual connection, and just when you begin to feel secure, they strip it away. This sudden deprivation triggers panic, confusion, and longing, ensuring that you remain psychologically tethered to them. In that vacuum of love, the narcissist gains absolute power, because your emotional stability now depends on their unpredictable mercy. The narcissist's decision to withhold intimacy is rarely random. It is a punishment, a demonstration of power, and a tool of control. Many survivors report that these withdrawals happen after moments of independence, after setting a boundary, voicing discomfort, or simply asserting individuality. In response, the narcissist retaliates not with words but with absence. Dr. Judith Orloff, a psychiatrist specializing in empathy and emotional abuse, notes that this affectional starvation is a form of psychological conditioning. The victim's brain, conditioned by cycles of reward and deprivation, starts associating compliance with safety and resistance with loss. Over time, this can mimic the same neurological patterns seen in addiction: a desperate craving for another hit of warmth, validation, or touch. Sex, in healthy relationships, is an act of mutual expression, a physical manifestation of emotional connection. But in the narcissistic dynamic, it becomes a currency of control. The narcissist knows that intimacy is not merely physical. It's emotional, psychological, even spiritual. When they withdraw it, they are not just withholding pleasure, they are withholding validation, belonging, and worth. Dr. Gabor Mate, known for his work on trauma and attachment, emphasizes that our need for connection is biological. When that connection is threatened, the brain interprets it as danger. The narcissist exploits this primal fear, turning love into leverage. And because sexual intimacy once felt transcendent, intoxicating, almost sacred, its absence feels like spiritual exile. The manipulation runs deeper than punishment alone. Many psychologists view the narcissist's use of sex as a form of energy siphoning. During intimacy, there is an exchange of emotional energy, what some call a sacred energy exchange. But in a narcissistic bond, that exchange is one-sided. The victim gives affection, vulnerability, and emotional energy. The narcissist absorbs it like fuel. They feel recharged, validated, and alive, while the victim, unknowingly, leaves the encounter a little more drained. This dynamic reinforces dependency, as the victim begins to associate exhaustion and emotional depletion with love itself. Healing, experts suggest, begins when survivors learn to separate passion from manipulation and recognize that genuine connection never leaves you empty. At the heart of this control lies objectification. In the narcissist's mind, your body, your affection, even your emotions are not expressions of personhood. They are instruments of supply. You are not seen as a partner, but as a mirror reflecting back their worth. Dr. Craig Malkin, author of Rethinking Narcissism, explains that narcissists use people to stabilize their fragile self-esteem. They consume admiration and affection the way others might consume oxygen. In the beginning, you are the perfect mirror, new, shiny, responsive. Your validation fills their void. But as time passes, and your needs begin to surface, you disrupt their illusion of total control. What once felt intoxicating becomes inconvenient. So they withdraw not because you've changed, but because you've become too real. The shift is subtle but devastating. Where once there was closeness, there is now coldness. Where once you felt desired, now you feel invisible. Psychologists often describe this stage as devaluation, the inevitable phase when the narcissist's fantasy collapses under the weight of your humanity. To regain the high of admiration, they may seek new sources, new supply. Meanwhile, the victim is left haunted by the memory of what the connection used to feel like, replaying early moments of passion like a lost paradise. This is how the trauma bond deepens. Your mind clings to the illusion, hoping that if you behave differently, the warmth will return. But it never truly does, because it was never real love, only manipulation disguised as intimacy. Recovery, psychologists agree, begins with reclaiming narrative and energy. Survivors must understand that the narcissist's withdrawal was never a reflection of their inadequacy. It was a calculated maneuver to preserve dominance. Dr. Lindsay Gibson, author of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, suggests that healing requires both emotional detachment and self-reconnection. This means reclaiming your sense of self-worth outside the narcissist's validation loop. It involves building internal stability, establishing boundaries, and rediscovering what genuine intimacy feels like: connection without fear, love without exhaustion. Ultimately, what the narcissist fears most is not your departure, but your awakening. The moment you see their tactics for what they are, psychological warfare disguised as romance, their control begins to unravel. The dictatorship only thrives in silence and confusion. When you begin to speak, to name the pattern, to choose yourself, you end the regime. What once felt like punishment transforms into liberation. And what once seemed like love reveals itself for what it always was: a performance designed to keep you small, until you remembered how powerful you truly are. At first, everything feels electric. The connection, the chemistry, the passion that seemed to pulse like an unending current between you. But one day, the current fades. The warmth turns cold. You start wondering what changed. Why the touch that once ignited your heart now feels distant, mechanical, or absent altogether. According to psychologists, this moment, when intimacy turns to ice, marks one of the most psychologically destabilizing points in a relationship with a narcissist. It's not merely withdrawal. It's a test, a performance of power, and a silent psychological experiment designed to gauge how deeply you are still under their control. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, one of the foremost voices in narcissistic abuse psychology, explains that narcissists are addicted to novelty and validation. What once excited them, your attention, your admiration, your devotion, eventually becomes too familiar. Familiarity, to them, is suffocating because it requires emotional reciprocity, something they fundamentally lack. Where most people find comfort in emotional safety, the narcissist perceives it as boredom. So, when the early thrill fades, they start seeking the same high elsewhere, through new admirers, new fantasies, or even through provoking emotional chaos in you. Their withdrawal from intimacy is not always about physical desire. It's about the power dynamic, the thrill of knowing they can make you chase them, question yourself, and crumble without ever lifting a hand. Psychologists describe this phase as a form of emotional testing. The narcissist pulls away not to end the relationship but to observe your reaction. Will you beg? Will you panic? Will you fight for their attention? Every plea and every tear confirms their control. Dr. Eleanor Greenberg, an expert in narcissistic personality disorder, explains that narcissists constantly need to reaffirm their dominance. By withdrawing affection, they reestablish hierarchy. They are the chooser and you are the chosen. Your anxiety becomes their proof of importance. The cruel paradox is that while you are desperate to reconnect, they are quietly measuring how much emotional ownership they still hold over you. This withdrawal is also a defense mechanism against vulnerability. True intimacy requires openness, the ability to be seen, flawed and human. But narcissists fear vulnerability as others might fear exposure to pain. To them, vulnerability equals weakness, and weakness is shame. Psychologist Dr. Brené Brown has written extensively about this. People with fragile egos and deep insecurity often mask their fear of shame through emotional armor, control, dominance, and withdrawal. When the narcissist senses that emotional closeness might reveal their emptiness or dependency, they retreat. They would rather destroy the bond than risk being seen as imperfect. And so, the relationship becomes profoundly one-sided. You love, they manage. You give, they withhold. The narcissist's worldview is inherently hierarchical. They must always be the object of worship, not an equal participant in love. As psychologist Dr. Linda Martinez-Louis describes, the narcissist views relationships as extensions of self, not mutual connections. You are meant to orbit them, to reflect their greatness, to serve their ego. When you stop doing that, when you assert a need, express disappointment, or simply exist outside their control, they respond with emotional exile. In their mind, love is not partnership, it's ownership. For the victim, this emotional exile leaves deep psychological scars. You start believing you are the problem. You tell yourself, if I were more beautiful, more patient, more loving, maybe they'd want me again. The narcissist's coldness begins to distort your self-image. You internalize their rejection as proof of your inadequacy. Dr. Patrick Carnes, an expert in trauma bonding, calls this the cycle of self-abandonment, when victims of manipulation silence their needs, suppress their emotions, and overgive in an effort to earn back love that should never have been conditional. Over time, this cycle rewires your brain. Just like Pavlov's dogs conditioned to salivate at the sound of a bell, you start responding to emotional deprivation with desperate pursuit. Their silence becomes your signal to chase, their coldness your cue to prove your worth. This, psychologists warn, is where the trauma bond deepens. The brain, confused by alternating affection and punishment, releases a flood of stress hormones followed by dopamine when reconciliation occurs. It's an addictive loop. Each small moment of warmth after rejection feels euphoric, almost sacred, a hit of emotional relief that reinforces the bond. But as Dr. Nicole Lepper notes, this is not love. It's intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological mechanism used in gambling addiction. You stay not because you're weak, but because your brain has been chemically trained to mistake chaos for connection. Breaking free begins with understanding. The first step, according to trauma recovery experts, is to stop chasing. When the narcissist withdraws, resist the instinct to pursue. Every message you send, every apology you make, feeds their ego and strengthens the dynamic. Instead, practice radical detachment. Let them retreat into their silence, not as punishment, but as protection for your own sanity. As Dr. Ramani often reminds survivors, their withdrawal does not define your worth. It reveals their fear of intimacy. By not chasing, you dismantle their control. You remind both yourself and them that you exist outside their validation. Healing also involves retraining your nervous system. Your body has been conditioned to equate anxiety with love. Through therapy, grounding techniques, and self-compassion, you can begin to rewire that response. Psychologists often guide survivors toward reconnecting with self-worth through small acts of autonomy, setting boundaries, pursuing passions, rebuilding social circles. Each act of independence weakens the trauma bond and strengthens your sense of self. In the end, the narcissist's withdrawal was never about you. It was about maintaining their illusion of superiority. Their silence was not your punishment. It was their defense. The love you mourned was a performance designed to keep you obedient, not cherished. When you finally understand that truth, when you stop seeing their coldness as proof of your failure and start seeing it as evidence of their fear, that's when you reclaim your power. The addiction fades, the fog lifts, and for the first time in a long time, your heart begins to beat for you, not for the person who once made you doubt it. When you find yourself trying to earn the love that someone is deliberately withholding, you may not realize that you are unconsciously tightening the very chains that keep you bound to their control. Each attempt to please, prove, or persuade them only feeds the imbalance of power they have created. It's as though, with every act of self-sacrifice, you are digging yourself deeper into a grave built from your own longing. The real act of courage, therefore, is not in chasing what's been taken away, but in turning inward, redirecting your attention, your care, and your energy back to yourself, where it always belonged. This process begins with a return to the body, because healing is not an intellectual exercise. It's a reconnection with the self that has been ignored for too long. Recenter yourself. Reclaim the rhythm of your breath and the pulse of your own emotions. When your sense of self has been eroded by manipulation or conditional affection, it's easy to confuse intimacy with approval. Yet one of the most vital realizations you can make is that genuine closeness does not depend on someone's validation. The rejection you're experiencing is not a reflection of your worth, your beauty, or your desirability. It's a mirror held up to the other person's inability to love in a healthy way. It's important to step back and see this dynamic for what it truly is. Once you begin to understand the machinery of manipulation and emotional control, the confusion that once clouded your judgment starts to fade. Clarity brings freedom, and with understanding comes the ability to make decisions that serve your growth instead of your pain. Awareness transforms what once felt like rejection into revelation. It becomes the turning point that allows you to move forward with intention, rather than circling endlessly in the same emotional maze. But before you can fully let go, you must grieve, not the person themselves, but the illusion of who you thought they were. You must mourn the fantasy, the image of love that was never real but felt real enough to hurt when it disappeared. The truth is, they were never that version of themselves. They were someone damaged, someone who might have believed they could sustain a relationship but never possessed the emotional capacity to truly connect. You may have given them what they needed: validation, care, energy, but they could never give you what you deserved in return. That absence of reciprocity is not your failure. It's the very proof of the imbalance that defined the relationship. When a narcissist withdraws affection or intimacy, it is not an act of mystery. It is an unmasking. It reveals that what felt like connection was, in fact, consumption. You were never loved as a whole person. You were used as a source of emotional nourishment. Instead of asking, "Why don't they want me anymore?" begin asking, "Why am I allowing myself to remain where I am not valued?" That shift in perspective changes everything, because it transfers power from them back to you. Remember, healing from this kind of emotional dynamic is not about winning them back. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about seeing the truth, grieving what never was, and deciding that your peace is worth more than their approval. When you stop trying to earn love and start learning to embody it from within, the control they once had begins to dissolve. And in that moment, you begin to rise not as the version of yourself they shaped, but as the person you were always meant to be.